Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm Deborah Hartswell and you're tuned into BBR, Cryptid and Paranormal Investigations. Thank you for joining me and I really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you are well and enjoying your day. I've never told anyone this. Wigan, the Roswell of the Northwest. From Bigfoot creatures to strange lights and a UFO crash in a park in Wigan. Written and reported by BBR member and author Simon Clark. At the end of November 2019, I did a book signing in Hereford. The book signing was a little slow, so I ended up giving away as many books as I sold. It was the following 24 hours that were totally fascinating, though. The hotel that I was staying in was very old. You know, the sort of building that has very thick walls. There were probably 20 or so seats, a small bar in the corner, and a roaring fire in the hearth. The previous night, when I'd been in, there were several locals who were all talking between each other. As I didn't feel such a stranger on the second night, I was more inclined to join in the conversation, especially as the landlord introduced me as an author. I got the conversation going and various questions came up. One of the guys started talking to me about aeroplanes because I said that I used to be in the RAF. He mentioned that one of his brothers owned an aeroplane, but he didn't know what sort it was. He called his brother over, and for the purposes of this article, we shall call him Dave. Dave knew some things about aeroplanes, but he didn't know what the brother's aircraft was either. As we talked, he asked, like most people, what books that I'd written, and I mentioned that I had written several from fiction to factual, discussing a number of subjects, including electric cars, aliens, UFOs, all the way through to Bigfoot. We chatted for a while on whether aliens and Bigfoot could possibly exist. Then he asked me if I believed in aliens, and I gave him my usual answer of, do you believe in gravity or electricity? Then he was more insistent if I thought that aliens existed. I looked him in the eyes and I said, yes, I believe that aliens exist. He looked around the room a little, inched forward on his chair and lowered his voice and said, I've never told anyone this before, but I've seen something. I felt privileged that he was opening up to me, and this is what he told me. He said when he was a teenager on his parents' farm, he stood there and watched as this object moved slowly from one side of the farmyard to the other. I asked him if he remembered any details. He said it was about 30 feet away. It was the size of a softball and was orange in colour. This is a common description of what is thought to be a robot surveillance device that is sent to look around places. Think of a modern quadcopter, said Simon, pardon me, that is programmed to survey an area, but with more intelligence. It would take in more details than anything that it found of interest and record them. His father, who also witnessed the event, suggested to him that he not tell anyone about what he'd seen for his own good. Thinking about this afterwards, I wondered if his father had seen something else years before and experienced the ridicule that recounting these sightings would get you back in the 1970s. I was fascinated by his account. The farm was less than 2 miles from where I was sat. We changed topics after a while and I told him about my paranormal event that happened in 1987. He looked at me and then he started to tell me about the voices that could be heard on the same farm. He said the voices sounded like a woman's voice who was comforting her child. It could be heard to be female, but the words were never distinct. Now the following morning at breakfast, a lady asked me if I was the author. I said yes, and we chatted for a while, and she asked me about my books. Again mentioned, as well as looking into Bigfoot in America, I was also involved in looking at the ones here in the UK. She gave a nervous laugh and then apologised, and she explained that she wasn't laughing at me on the notion of Bigfoot in the UK, just that she was nervous, and that she'd seen one 50 years ago. Interestingly, this lady was from Wigan, so not too far from you, Deb. Less than 10 miles from where I live. She said that a group of friends had gone to play in the woods as usual and they went to the cave. The cave had a low, wide-ish opening. The other children went in, but she didn't. She wasn't comfortable in the narrow spaces, so she stayed outside with the dogs. The dogs heard something, so they dashed off to investigate. She didn't mention what the dogs were, but they were quite happy taking on an Alsatian. They ran back to her a minute later, and then they went to investigate another sound. And this time when they came back, they had their tails between the legs. By now, all of the children were running out of the cave. They all heard something moving that didn't sound right, so they started to run. Their road straight home would have taken them past the noise, so they had to run towards the golf club. After a while, as they were running, they all saw it, and as it was running towards them, they described it as 6 to 7 feet tall. It was very broad and covered in hair. The lady says that as the dogs ran, they had their tails between their legs, and this is when she got frightened. I was absolutely fascinated by all of these accounts, and the fact that everyone opened up to me, that wasn't what I expected, said Simon. Now, I had a look around and rummaged through my notes, and I did manage to find some similar light anomaly reports from very close by. Now, a couple of anglers were reported to have seen a UFO. A number of triangular-shaped craft were seen by 2 men whilst out fishing beside a lake in the Coppell area. The guys described the craft as at least 200 feet long, with no markings, and were matte black in colour. They also told me that there were at least 5 of the objects seen at the same time. No sound was heard from the craft, even though there were no more than a couple of thousand feet above them. In all, the sight had lasted for 3 minutes, at which time a couple of dark coloured helicopters approached the area, causing the triangular craft to vanish. The men in question want no publicity from their sighting, and they're not prepared to discuss this matter further. Now, not too far away, only about a mile, a strange orange light crashes in Wigan Park. On the 23rd of January 1995, at around about 8 p.m, the park's on Manchester Road in Higher Ince, and several witnesses claim to have seen a UFO soaring towards the ground and apparently land in Ince Park. Now, the initial sighting was reported to police by a taxi driver from Freeways Taxis. He described the object as an orange object. The police were quick to respond, but on arrival at the site, no debris could be found. The police spokesperson said there was absolutely nothing to suggest that a plane had crashed in the area. Following procedures, we contacted air traffic control to see if they could throw any light on the matter, but they know as little as we do. It will probably remain a mystery. The taxi driver, though, was not the only witness that night. A paperboy, Sebastian Willerton, and his friend Anthony Bayliss also saw the luminous object. At first, I thought it was someone mucking about with fireworks, Sebastian told the Wigan reporter. But I realised it wasn't and saw it look like a plane that had crashed. John Peake of the Wigan reporter also uncovered another witness who recalled, "It was close to 8 o'clock and I was walking up Manchester Road, not paying much attention as it was very cold and I was well wrapped up. I couldn't help noticing, though, something not so far in the distance dropping out of the sky. It looked very much like a light aircraft, and it went down in the vicinity of the park. Something I found a little odd at the time. Now, before the object crashed, it seemed to pause above the ground for a split second. And it was only a split second, and I can offer no explanation as to why or how this might have happened if it was an aircraft." On the night in question, Bill Eatark, the Quest International local investigator, had noticed an unusual triangular-shaped UFO pass very low by his computer room window. He lives a short distance from the park. However, he saw nothing of the crash. Investigating further, he discovered on visiting the park that a number of trees had been either cut or knocked down. There were several circular holes that had been freshly cored out of the nearby grass, and there were dead fish floating in the park lake. On later questioning local residents, he discovered there had been a lot of activity in the park on that night, and when the locals went to investigate, they found one area of the park cordoned off, protected by men in light-coloured overalls. When the residents questioned the men in the overalls, they were told by these people that they were from the MOD and to leave the area. Did a plane crash or did a UFO land near Wigan in January of 95? I mean, it has all the hallmarks of Wigan's answer to Roswell, says the newspaper, and the story will probably grow before we find the answer. However, in March 1986, a man who was travelling from Shevington to Orrell Post by foot noticed a big orange oval shape in the sky above and to the right of him. Another man on his way to work encountered what he described as a pumpkin-shaped craft. The craft had a big recess down the centre. It had 4 lights, 2 white, 1 red and 1 green. Now 3 large windows were visible, through which could be seen 5 Mediterranean-looking beings. They seemed human, quite tall, with long black hair, and they wore tight-fitting black trousers and burnt orange-coloured tops. Now the craft was brilliant white in colour and made up of a complex array of segments, each one containing 9 indentations, like those found on the golf ball. The light inside the craft came from the walls rather than the ceiling and was as a soft brown colour. In February 95, a lady made a report of a being in the bedroom. About a year ago, I woke in the night and I noticed flashing lights. I thought it was an ambulance or the fire brigade, so I got out of bed and I looked through the window. To my astonishment, I saw about 12 coloured lights in a diamond pattern in the sky. Each light was spinning rapidly and pulsating. Suddenly, the lights got nearer and nearer to my house, and I got so scared I quickly shut the curtains and got back into bed. My first thoughts about the ambulance or the fire brigade were quashed. I didn't know what it was, and eventually I must have woke up. Later in the night, I woke up to find a being stood at the bottom of the bed. I couldn't scream, but I tried to get away. This being was about 4 feet tall, and it was glowing a brilliant white. Its eyes were massive and oval shaped, and the brightest blue I'd ever seen. Then it smiled at me, and to my amazement, its teeth were yellow. I tried so hard to get away from it and out of the room, but I couldn't move. I knew I wasn't dreaming, and I was scared stiff. The next thing I remember in the morning, I sat up in bed and I felt unwell. I felt sort of drugged and sluggish. So I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I got the shock of my life. I had bruises on both temples and on my right eye. I also had 3 penny-sized dots on my stomach. Strangely, within 2 hours, the bruising went away. I went to the doctors and he gave me cream to put on the spots, and he told me that I was just allergic to cats, and I told him that I don't have a cat. He insisted that I must have, and I must have held one at some point, but I hadn't. I couldn't tell the doctor what had happened in case he laughed at me and said it was a nightmare. The cream did remove the spots, but I know what I saw, and it was no dream. The following day, I noticed a hole in my curtains, and it was 6 inch by 6 inch. Before I witnessed what I saw, there was no hole in those curtains. Now, there are so many more UFO and strange reports in Wigan that I couldn't mention them all here, but I have added a link so that you can access them on the Wigan UFO blog. Now, a small report that I found, there's not much information on it, so I'm going to do a little bit digging on it. But in Platt Lane in Wigan, there are a number of reports from motorists who have reported eyes looking out from the bushes at them. So if I find anything else out about that, or you know anybody that's experienced that, let me know and I can share it with everybody else. you.